Your country is in debt, but according to many, it doesn't matter because, quote, we owe it to ourselves. Well, ask Greece, Cyprus, Italy, and just about every country what they've been dealing with since the financial crisis. Assets have been sold off for pennies on the dollar because of their massive debt situation. National treasures will be sold off to the elite as they squeeze and constrict until there's nothing left. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Today we're going to look at a situation that is not being discussed in the mainstream media, and it seems to be abandoned by the alternative media as well. Why this information is not being covered regularly is beyond me, but that's why you come here to this channel to get this kind of information. So we'll look around the world today for different examples where this has taken place since the financial crisis. Connecticut and Hartford get a $2 billion offer for properties. Desperate times call for desperate measures, but are Connecticut and its capital, Hartford, desperate enough to sell and lease back their properties and guarantee the buyer a hefty return? This is just one example of this instance where debt has caused asset sales. This could happen to the average individual, but it also happens on a larger scale. Whether we are looking at the cities, states or provinces or regions, or we have the country itself. All around the world, the same thing is happening. Now, there is the potential for privatization of particular departments and sections of government. This occurs all the time. But we have an issue here that I'll get into in just a moment. A Chicago-based private equity real estate firm is offering as much as $2 billion to purchase office buildings, healthcare facilities, transit-related properties, and whatever the government thinks that they can sell. So you see the problem. Now in this instance here, it's being sold to a domestic private equity real estate firm. But there are instances in which this has been purchased by very wealthy individuals, or we have foreign individuals. There is also the case where we have foreign institutions buying in. Now, what's concerning is when you have those foreign individuals or institutions purchasing up assets, particularly infrastructure, because today, everything may be totally fine between the two nations, but at any point, you can't predict it. At any point, that bond could be severed, and we may have a very serious situation on our hands. This is some of the fears that are being expressed today from what is happening, not just with China, but with many other countries. Today, it might be okay, but what about tomorrow? It's one thing to buy, a company or something that doesn't really have much of a presence, particularly a physical presence in that particular nation. But when you start buying up literal infrastructure, then it's going to be a problem. I've done videos about this before, for different parts of the world, but I wanted to show you some examples, some from other videos I've shown you, but also from new ones that I haven't covered before. Look at this. Such a transaction isn't unheard of. In the aftermath of the last recession, Arizona sold a slew of properties, including its Capitol building, to bondholders to help close budget deficits left by the real estate crash. There's nothing that they won't sell off. If you don't think that you might one day have on the side of the Coliseum Starbucks or Walmart or Amazon or some other big institution, like as if it's any other stadium. And here in the second paragraph, they talk about these different stadiums. Well, that's what's going to happen. Big institutions, whether they're domestic or foreign, are going to buy up everything because of the debt situation. So we can't say we owe it to ourselves. That's not the way it works. Maybe literally, Or at least you think so, because of course, all debt ultimately is owed back to the central bank. That's the way this works. Don't be fooled. Okay, so that's the situation that's going on today. Let's talk about some issues here, looking at other places around the US, and then I'll go into others. Connecticut has the highest net tax-supported debt per capita of any US state. Okay? And look at this. The current administration is making a push to sell off federal assets as part of its infrastructure plan. We have airports that are part of this potential plan here, major parkways serving the Washington area, power assets around the country. Now look at these power assets, for example. If that's sold off to a foreign individual, what could that potentially, present us with in the future? Sure, maybe it's sold off, for example, in this case, they sell it off to a neighboring country like Canada, and relations are good. But what if 10 years down the road, Canada doesn't want it anymore, and they sell it off to China, for instance? Now you have a Chinese corporation, probably state-owned indirectly or directly, owning power assets within the US. Is that a good thing to have? I don't think so. Not just because it's one country or another. I don't think so. At least you would want that corporation that buys it up, or that individual, to at least be domestic. If you're going to do this, if you're going to privatize in this way, you wouldn't want any foreign interference in this case. Greece completes the sale of 14 airports. You remember that. I covered it here on this channel. Airports were gone, and so many other, massive projects for this infrastructure. Look at this. Emir of Qatar buys 6 Greek islands for $7 million. That's a steal. That's a steal. For these 6 Greek islands, he wants to get 24. But, he has 24 children, I believe it was, and he wants to get one for each of those kids. So a few more million. I'm sure he'll get there. And this right here is dealing with the UK. The government sold off a number of publicly owned assets, including stakes in the Royal Mail, Eurostar, and bailed out banks for a total of $26.4 billion. Critics George Osborne of selling off the family silver at record pace. Some of the deals were considered to be of poor value for the taxpayer and bargain prices for institutional investors. Of course. It always works like that. Pennies on the dollar. Pennies on the dollar. Okay, talking about here different assets, but it could be financial assets, right? Pure paper or digital, and it could be physical assets, or it could be infrastructure. There are different reasons why you would want one to, or wouldn't mind necessarily certain things being sold off. But I think once you get into the infrastructure portion, it's really, really not a good idea. But in general, I wanted to interject here for a moment. I don't like big government. I really don't. But there are some things that could be taken care of by government. And I think that, maybe in a very long-term scenario, we could have a situation where the government owns basically nothing or very, very little. But there are so many other things right now that they are spending their money on. I just did my previous video where it's just wasted completely. So let's work on the things that can be taken care of right away, and you'll be able to fill in all these shortfalls. You don't need to worry about all this. Selling off, precious assets. David Cameron will clear the way for a multi-billion-dollar pound semi-privatization of trunk roads and motorways as he announces plans to allow sovereign wealth funds from countries such as China to lease roads in England. I don't like this idea. The same thing happened in the Toronto area where they sold off a major highway, a toll-based highway, off to foreign corporations. I don't like the asset being sold off. They have full control over it. Of course, it works the other way around too, but it's not good. I see too many possible negative consequences of that at some point in the future. This is here how the City of London is making millions selling off roads for redevelopment. Goes into that article here. I'm not going to cover it. Treasury says that Italy can sell $54 billion in state assets. It, again, goes on. Not going to cover the whole thing. I've gotten to this before. You're talking about billions of dollars worth, major assets that are going to be sold off. Probably already have, there's so much going on, and it says right here what they can sell off, whether it's their real estate, their companies, etc. How desperate do they have to be that they're willing to just get rid of them? Gas Natural Fenosa in $1.2 billion Italian asset sale. Another example there. Italian opposition parties accuse the government of, quote, selling off the country's strategic heritage to France and putting the well-being of future generations of Italians on the line. That's a quote here. This is what will happen. They're going to sell off everything that they can in order to make the elite in control. You think that this is because of this crisis of debt and everything else, but ultimately it's a transfer of wealth to the elite. That's the way this is working. The central banks are fully involved, and the major supranational entities like the IMF, World Bank, and others are all in collusion to make sure that assets which should belong to the people ultimately end up in the hands of this so-called technocratic elite. The Church of Cyprus, heavily hit by the country's financial crisis 2 years ago, will dispose of assets to help pay off $100 million owed to banks, its head has said. We have made deals with the banks and we are ready to give them some property so that we can repay our debts and start investing. At the very bottom it says, we believed in the banks, we invested in banks continuously, and in the end, they collapsed. This is not good. And understand why I'm saying this. Because they're all forced into taking more risky bets, investing in things that are supposedly safe and sound, but they're not. They are absolutely not safe. Bank of Cyprus, 1.1 billion asset disposal, trying to get rid of all these assets, trying to make some money back, and of course, it's never enough. And then last but not least, IMF policy decisions papers. Should Italy sell its non-financial assets to reduce the debt? So all of these today, we've looked at what has happened since the financial crisis. Different points from then until today, all the same. They're selling off assets because they're in debt. Could be to domestic individuals or corporations, or it could be to foreign individuals and corporations. Either way, we have a very big problem because of the reason why this is happening. Where does this debt originate? It's from the central banks. The central banks created the system to continuously and perpetually create more debt. These countries will never get out of debt. They can sell every piece of real estate, every asset within a particular nation, and I assure you they will never get to the bottom of their debt situation because it's designed this way. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. Last but not least, if you found the video informative, I know that you will find my books, The Money GPS, and my newer release, Global Economic Collapse, even more informative. You can actually flip through these books. All you got to do is go over to Amazon. The links are in the description of this video, and you can click on the link. It'll bring you over there. There's a look inside feature, which will allow you to flip through the pages of the books to see if you like them. Take care.